The rain falls once again, the sound steady and comforting. I prepare my tools and check my inventory. My goals for today include finishing my builds from last time and capturing animals for domestication. The Clayworks Pavilion merely needs a roof, but the storage hut needs everything but the floor, including a cellar for long-term food storage. Since the available resources are currently limited, I once again will be using rammed earth. I lay out the first few blocks to get an idea of the size of the room. I then broke my shovel and had to make a new one due to my having only made knives and an axe earlier. The width of the cellar will be the same as the hut, but the depth and the length will depend on how far I can dig before I hit solid stone. This ends up not being very far, but I suppose I can always dig out more once I have a pickaxe. The unstable dirt continuously falls around me as I place the walls. I then make those same walls 1 block shorter, since I want to have more of the cellar be underground. All that is left is the floor and the ceiling. I carefully left a stepped area where I would eventually place stairs, and began digging out the excess dirt. A few limestone blocks obstructed the space, so I decided to use them as a natural shelf and placed some additional rammed earth to further this intent. Now I just needed a great deal of wood, preferably redwood. To my surprise, the skies cleared and the rain faded away as I spotted the tree I wished to chop down. I had 2 spare axes, plus my main axe, which was nearly broken. I began chopping, and the sound of insects grew steadily louder. All 3 axes splintered and broke, and not even half the tree fell. I made 3 more axes and returned to chopping away at this giant. Once again, all 3 axes splintered, and still the tree had not fallen in full. What did fall filled my pockets, and still more logs littered the ground. I gathered all I could and returned to my base. I would have to come back for the rest. Once again the rain fell, or more likely, it had always been falling. I had simply stepped away from it for a moment. I began placing the logs along the top of the cellar wall, but this was not going to empty my pockets enough to collect the remaining wood. I would need a storage vessel, such as the ones I had at my treehouse. I hurried to grab it, stopping only when I heard the ground collapsing behind me. Turning, I watched as the hillside slid toward a nearby cave. I had been lucky this time. Next time, I should be cautious. I moved a few items out of one storage vessel and added a few additional stacks of wood to the other. I then grabbed some food and hurried back to the hut. I placed a couple logs before emptying my pockets and returning to collect the rest of the fallen tree. I then made a couple more axes, emptied my pockets once more, made a minor adjustment to the top of the cellar wall, and finally chopped down the rest of that tree. Considering my first axe had nearly broken when I started, it took 6 axes in total to take down that single redwood. The logs filled an entire clay storage vessel, and then some, and yet I knew I would eventually need far more wood than any single redwood could provide. I also did not want to ruin the landscape by demolishing every red giant in the area, which meant I needed seeds to plant more. But that was an issue for another day. First, I had 2 buildings to finish, and then I needed enough food to not starve. In the glow of the setting sun, I added beams to the storage hut, emptied my pockets, and headed home just as darkness fell. I crawled into my straw mat and drifted off to sleep. When I woke, the sky was hauntingly red, but at least the rain had stopped. I began the day by replacing the quarter logs of the storage hut with standard logs and headed out to collect sticks. Lots and lots of sticks. I started by using a knife to cut branches, but this quickly became annoying as I kept stabbing at the air by accident. I collected some cypress for my treehouse and promptly began starving. Lucky for me, the nearby forest was full of mushrooms, although not all of them were edible. I also learned that branches broke much faster with an axe, which made collecting sticks much easier. So, I made several more axes and continued chopping away. I also learned that using the axe increased the number of nuts and seeds I collected, along with the number of branches. I stopped to collect more flint in case I needed more axes. I also grabbed more mushrooms so I could avoid starving a bit longer. I was especially excited to find a walnut tree. I love the silvery color of the wood, and if I collect enough walnuts, I could use them in recipes. I'm not sure which recipes, but I look forward to finding out. As I collected the sticks, I soon found more amaranth. I then got shot by a bowthorn and was forced to hide behind a tree until I could figure out where it was shooting from. A single bowthorn is usually easy to defeat, mainly because it is a coward and will run when chased. I chased the bowthorn into a cave where it died at the edge of darkness. I used a torch to check for additional enemies before looting the body. To my surprise, it carried a bone arrow, an item I had never seen before, but had hoped would be added to the game. Curious and a bit foolish, I decided to explore the cave. I immediately regretted that choice and noped out. A shiver chased me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure which of us would die first. In the end, we both lived as the shiver fled, and I chose not to give chase. I stopped by some wild flax and was checking the space in my pockets when a bleat caught my attention. I was certain it was the spotted creature, the one that was likely to be a goat, and although I had heard it, I could not see it. So I grabbed some red wine cap mushrooms and returned home. I planted all the tree seeds I had collected and then used my knife and the many sticks to make wattle fences. These became the walls of the storage hut. I left an opening at the front for the entrance, and one looking over the lake as a window. The back of the hut I covered completely. I then piled the rest of the sticks near the window, after which I changed my mind and moved them to the back wall. I might move them again later. I had more sticks than I realized, so I put the rest next to the clay works pavilion. I also needed a few more axes and some rammed earth. It wouldn't be long before I moved into the Copper Age, and that meant I would need coal. A simple dirt hut would collapse, but a rammed earth pit would be perfect for burning lots and lots of firewood. I chose a spot next to the cellar. I would need to start with the roof and the walls. I decided to keep the coal pit small for now. I could make a larger one for fun later. I removed one of the roof pieces so I could later add the fire pit, and then got distracted. I must have seen something, but for the life of me, I cannot recall what it was. I just know I kept running and looking about. Perhaps it was the spotted creature again. Or maybe I was chasing shadows. In the end, I gathered some cattail roots and turnips and returned home. I would need more food before I could do anything else. While I waited for the roots to cook, I made more rough cypress fences and filled in the rest of the walls of my treehouse. There were a few spots I wasn't sure I wanted to enclose or leave open. I decided to leave them open for now. I woke to loud insects and a fog thicker than amaranth porridge. I could barely see across the lake. I had to move carefully to avoid walking into a rift and to navigate around the pit cave. The fog was slightly less thick near the work buildings, but there was also a huge rift in front of the clay work pavilion. This was fine. I needed to go out searching for food anyway, but first I needed fences and gates. Wild grains, mushrooms, and other vegetables were fine for quick meals, but I needed a long-term source of food, and that meant domesticating animals. I carefully surveyed the area before picking the spot behind the clay works pavilion. It needed a bit of terraforming to flatten out, but it would be the perfect place to put some animal pens. However, the pens would have to wait, as I was now starving. As I searched for food, I found some ruins to add to my map. I was about to grab some tasty mushrooms when a bear appeared out of nowhere. I ran, stopped for different mushrooms, and turned around to find no bear in sight. The only solution was to dig a hole and lure the bear into it. A nasty shiver tried to stop my brilliant plan, but I managed to chase it off and return to digging my hole. The shiver attacked again, but this time I killed it. A shame shivers couldn't be eaten. I returned to digging and nearly died to falling dirt. Beast pits don't work nearly as well when the ground is unstable. I needed packed dirt to keep the walls from collapsing. But finally I was ready to hunt. Now I just needed the bear. I did not find the bear, but I did find red currant berries, plus a few black currant berries, and more amaranth. I even found some onions. My belly full, I felt my good sense returning and realized that intentionally agitating a bear while my health was low may not have been the best idea. Hunting a wild pig, however, seemed like a brilliant idea. The pig tried to run, but I soon caught up. This, however, was a trap. A boat horn sniped me from somewhere in the trees, and I suffered my first death in this new world. I gathered lots of rocks on my way back, as well as some berries and berry bushes. I even found some flax. Unfortunately, the sun was setting fast, and I needed to recover my things before it got dark. I did stop for copper, which may not have been the best idea, as it was soon nearly impossible to see. Thankfully, the faint light in the distance was my very own treehouse. Now I could sleep till morning and recover my things in the light of day. I stopped to empty my pockets, glare at a shiver, and then plant my berry bushes before finally collecting my fallen items. I returned to empty my pockets again and munched on some berries before returning to digging. Finally, the land was flat and I could place the fences. I made another shovel to clear a bit more space, tried to ignore the ominous rift in front of the Clayworks pavilion, and finished fencing off the area for the animals. Finally, I could go searching for the spotted creature, the one I was certain was a goat. I had heard the bleating so many times before, I was certain it was nearby. Sure enough, I soon heard the bleating again, and this time I followed it. To my surprise, the goat appeared quickly, and even more surprising was how easily it ran into the pen, almost as though it had been waiting to be domesticated this whole time. This particular goat was male. If I could find a female, I could begin breeding a whole herd. I decided to make a second animal pen for chickens. From previous experience, it didn't take long for the animal population to get out of control. This time, I would focus on getting to the next generation first and worry about increasing the number of animals later. But first, I needed a few more fences and to fight another shiver. That annoying rift finally disappeared, but with all the damage I had taken, I would soon need more food. I harvested cattail roots and berries and stopped to admire my treehouse for a moment before collecting more cattails. I made another basket and added it to the storage hut. Next, I took the fences and blocked off a path so herding the chickens would be easier. More rifts appeared as I headed out to find a rooster and a hen. Shortly after, I heard a loud buzzing within the trees and carefully searched the branches. I had set out to find chickens and instead found a beehive. This one was much closer than the first hive, which meant it would be much easier to start an apiary. I marked my map and immediately found the chickens. 2 of them fell into a hole, and unfortunately, one of them was the rooster. I needed both a rooster and a hen to begin domesticating the wild birds. I carefully dodged the rifts while herding the chicken and blocking it into the pen. I then moved the fence closer to the gate, so when I finally found a rooster, it would be easier to catch. While searching for a living rooster, I collected more amaranth and berry bushes. I then came across a couple of goats. As the sun set and the sky grew dark, I hoped at least one of these goats would be female, so I would have a breeding pair for domestication. I nearly lost the goat in the forest and feared it may have fallen in a nearby hole. But I found it again near a pond and managed to herd it towards my base. I had to stop when a bowthorn shot me from the darkness, and another rift blocked my path. With any luck, the goat would not wander far, and I could try again once the sun rose. I stopped for more berry bushes, which I added to the growing field. I could hear the goat nearby. I just needed to find it. I searched carefully, doing my best to follow each bleat. I finally found it in a nearby cave and dodged another bowthorn as the spotted creature darted for the forest. I circled round, headed off, careful to guide it into the pen. Instead, it ran into the storage hut, but at last I managed to get it where I wanted. I confirmed it was a female Sirohi goat before putting her in with the male. Having goats was going to pay off in the long run, not just because of the meat and leather I could obtain, but also because of the milk I could harvest for cheese. This was an excellent start to my farm. Now I just needed a rooster. But first, I planted the cattail roots. I also needed more food, and since the red wine caps I found were near the peridot stone, I decided to collect more of those for the farm terrace. I gathered cobblestone from some ruins and found my first interesting treasure inside a cracked vessel, a tuning cylinder called Hallow Croft. I tried to remember if any of the traders had a means of playing it, but my mind drew a blank. I would simply have to hold on to this treasure until I was able to listen to it properly. Since I was near the ruins with the hidden room, I decided to return and collect the items left behind. To my surprise, the flax fibers were still there. I was certain they would have despawned by now, but I suppose if I was far enough away, then perhaps the chunk wouldn't have loaded, and the items would have more time before disappearing. The other cracked vessel contained coal, and I decided to leave the bee-nade and basket behind. As I gathered more peridot stone, I found a lake with tool, but by then my pockets were full. The only way to make room was to place the limestones on the ground. I could always collect more later. I gathered all the tool I could, and on my way back came across a patch of blue clay. To my knowledge, blue clay was not common, so I marked my map, planning to gather it later. Darkness was fast approaching, so I placed the cobblestone on the terrace wall, emptied my pockets, and hurried back to my treehouse. There I started a pot of hefty mushroom stew and made more cobblestone for the terrace walls. I woke to a bowthorn sniping me through the opening near the bed and decided I needed more walls there after all. I dodged the bone arrows as I crossed the lake and hurried to my work area. Once again, heavy rain poured from the sky as I used the thatch from the tool to make more roofing for my builds. By now it was clear that the tool would not be enough to complete the roofs. I would need to rely on grass, but first I needed lots of dirt, a new shovel, and even more dirt. I made more rammed earth to create the platform for the tool and the cattails, and planted the tool roots I had collected the day before. Even if dry grass was more plentiful, tool was still nice to have on hand. Either way, I needed to harvest an absurd amount of dry grass. It was a shame I didn't have a scythe yet. Thunder rumbled overhead as I placed the thatched roof on the storage hut. Although the base was circular, or as circular as you could get in a game of blocks, the roof was square and would come to a point. It wasn't long until I ran out of roof pieces and had to nab more knives. I took a break to place the cobblestone of the terrace wall and wondered if maybe I had made the first ledge too narrow. I might have to move it back later. Starvation reminded me of my lack of food, so I grabbed a few berries and ignored my low hunger to harvest more grass. Eventually, I could no longer ignore the imminent starvation and headed into the trees in hopes of finding mushrooms or some other crop to eat. I found berries, and then, for some reason, I forgot about the several piles of sticks at the base and started collecting more. I returned as the sun was setting and added more thatch to the roof of the storage hut. This time, I had enough, or almost enough. I hadn't made enough corner pieces and had used all the dry grass on sloped roof instead. I returned to the tree house in the dark and used my knife to take apart a few of the sloped, thatched roofs so I could convert them into corner pieces. After sleeping through the night, I made a few more axes and headed back to my work area. I finished the roof, grabbed more berries, and took note of the incoming temporal storm. I had just found a few more chickens, and with a little luck, I might be able to catch the rooster before the storm hit. Sadly, I lost track of the chickens, but I did find more soybeans and berries. At the very least, I could avoid starving just a little longer. I gathered conglomerate sand to use in daub. That way, I could put doors on the storage hut and avoid unwanted creatures entering. On my way back, I found a rooster. I hurried to herd it into the pen. Much like the goat, it escaped into the storage hut, and I was forced to move the fences to trap it. And yet, this most annoying creature still did not go toward the pens, and instead ran about the clayworks pavilion before running for the fields. But at long last, I did get it into the pen. 2 goats and 2 chickens, with 1 male and 1 female of each. With a bit more time before the storm, I planted berry bushes, gathered more grass and some clay, and made the daub for the front of the hut. I kept the rest of the wattle as it was, since I liked how it looked. I then gathered even more grass, because I still had 1 more roof to complete. The pavilion roof would have to wait, however, as the incoming storm was now imminent. I hurried back to my treehouse and wondered if I was safe. With the amount of open space, anything could spawn on the raised platform. The walls began to melt as time became unstable, so I gathered the extra fences and closed myself into a corner. Now, all I could do was wait. I watched the world flickering, struggling to continue its own existence. In the distance, Dave towered over everything, and finally, the storm ended. It was over. I had survived my first temporal storm in this new world. All things considered, it had been relatively tame, but I knew future storms would only get worse. I had a lot of preparation to do before the next one. But first, I had 2 buildings to complete. I started with the stairs, which I placed leading up from the terraced area, which would soon become my garden. I then gathered more dry grass. I would have continued gathering, except 2 bowthorn appeared from the nearby rift, and darkness was approaching once again. Back at my tree home, I made more torches and a thatched roof ridge for the top of the pavilion. In the setting sun, the insects grew louder and louder. They were the one downside to living in this swampy lake. I slept a bit too soon, and it was still very dark when I woke. So, while waiting for the sun, I made a hoe in preparation of starting a garden and a new knife. I munched on berries as the light finally filled the sky, and watched a lightning flash just before thunder rumbled. The rift activity must have been high, as several of them surrounded my home. I ignored each one in the morning fog as I placed the roof on my clayworks pavilion. Once again, it still was not enough, and I had to collect more dry grass. I added an overhang to make it look nicer, and wondered if the chisel worked on thatch. If not, then perhaps I could use wood to soften the jagged corners. Thunder rumbled as I collected cypress logs. The cellar was too flat for a thatch roof, but maybe a few logs would work just as well. Initially, I had hoped to bury the cellar underground, but the lack of pickaxe had limited how far down I could go. If I did bury it, at least the logs would make for a nice ceiling. I momentarily forgot the instability of dirt meant it could not be used as a temporary block, so I opted for rammed earth instead and began placing the cypress logs as the cellar ceiling. I placed a torch to light the space, but I would need something more permanent soon. I would also need proper doors, so anything placed in the cellar would actually be better preserved, but that would have to wait for next time. In any case, the 2 buildings I had started last episode were finally finished, or as finished as they were going to get before I obtained copper. It was a good start. Next time, I would plant my crops and enter the Copper Age. Thank you for watching, everyone, and thank you so much for helping my channel pass its first 1,000 followers. The more of you who like these videos, the more I will be able to make. This time around, I plan to really let my creative side show with the buildings and especially with the crazy machinery that will be available later in the game. I hope you enjoyed watching, and remember, take care of yourself.